Hey guys, Cody here with Found Atelier. In today's video, I'm going to take a look at the 3 biggest objections to using oil paint. Let's go. Before we get started, if you like to draw, sketch, paint, or really do anything with art, I would really encourage you to hit like and subscribe to this channel. That way you can see more videos like this in the future. Okay, so objections to oil painting. Now, a lot of times when people think about oil painting, the first thing they think about is reasons to not oil paint. All sorts of stuff comes to mind. And because of that, students tend to be attracted to water-based paints such as watercolor, acrylic paints, tempera paints, things like that. And in my opinion, those types of paints are actually more difficult to work with. In fact, in my opinion, I think that oil paint is the best type of paint to really learn how to paint with. I even made a video covering the 4 main reasons why I think this is the case, and you can check that video out when you're done with this one up here. All right, let's go ahead and discuss the 3 biggest objections to using oil paint and why they shouldn't stand in the way of you giving it a shot. The first objection that we're going to look at is that oil paint is toxic. A lot of people think that oil paint is poisonous, and they're like, not going anywhere near that. I'm not going to get sick from it and gain some sort of chronic illness by using it. This thought process probably stems from the fact that for most of history, oil paint was used right alongside a solvent such as pure gum spirits turpentine, that it was kind of nasty stuff. And it's true, if you're in a small, poorly ventilated space using turpentine as your solvent, chances are you're probably going to get a headache. You might feel a little nauseous, and that if you use it for a long period of time, you might have some issues. The truth is that in today's 21st century art studio, you don't really have to use that really toxic stuff anymore. In my studio, I use a solvent called Gamsol. Gamsol is made by the company Gamblin, and it's known to be the standard for studio safety when it comes to oil painting solvent. Gamsol is a really mild solvent that breaks down the oil in your paint, allowing you to clean your brushes and thin down the oil paint for washes and things like that. It's odorless and is nowhere near as toxic as the old stuff that was used. In fact, on Gamblin's website, they state that they have removed nearly 100% of the aromatic solvent, which is the stuff that gives you a headache and is not good to breathe in. And they say that they've refined out enough of it so all that remains is about 0.005%. In fact, Gamsol has such a high flash point, which means the temperature that it would catch on fire, that it can be shipped and labeled with a non-hazardous tag, which is pretty good. And even if you're someone who is really sensitive to fumes, because even Gamsol can affect a really small percentage of people, there are a lot of solvent-free options out there for those that don't even want to use solvent at all when they oil paint. Now, as for the paint itself, oil paint is really comprised of 2 main ingredients, oil and pigment. The oils used in oil paint are really just vegetable oils. They're completely non-toxic. Oils such as linseed oil, which comes from the flax plant. You have safflower oil, you have walnut oil, and maybe a couple of others. But for the most part, there's absolutely nothing wrong with these oils, and they're not going to hurt you one bit. The pigment, on the other hand, is what gives the paint its color, and usually it comes in a ground up fine powder that is then mixed with the oil. Now, it's true, some pigments are toxic. However, we have to kind of put a little asterisk on that because they are only toxic if they are ingested or if you breathe in the dry powder in the air. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm not going to be sitting there ingesting oil paint at any point in time. And as long as you're not sitting there and eating food with paint-covered hands, smoking, things like that, when you have oil paint on you, you're probably not going to have to worry about that. And as far as the dust goes, the pigment is kind of encapsulated in the oil in a kind of a liquid form. So it's not going to be floating up in the air. Really, the only time that this would be an issue is if you are making your own paint with powdered pigment, which most beginners aren't going to be doing anyway, or if you're taking a dry painting and sanding it down with a piece of sandpaper, which again, probably not going to do that very often. Not to mention, for the very few number of pigments that are considered toxic, such as the cadmiums, lead, cobalt, and maybe a few others, you can find other pigments to substitute for those that work just as well on the palette. In fact, at my studio at Fountain Atelier, all the pigments that we use are completely non-toxic, so you could work around that really easily. Objection number 2 to using oil paint is that it is hard to clean up. One of the reasons people like water-based paint is because you can take everything straight over to a sink and just wash everything out there, and the water actually acts as the solvent, breaking down the binder in the paint, and then you're good to go. It is true that with oil paint you need to use a solvent such as Gamsol, like we just talked about, to break down the oil in the paint. Water and oil don't get along very well, so if you just take your oily paintbrushes straight over to the sink, probably not going to be able to clean them with standard soap and water. That being said, using a safe studio solvent like Gamsol works great for rinsing your brushes out in and getting the paint off them. And then they make a type of soap called the Master's Hand Soap, and there's other brands too. And this soap does a great job at getting the paint, any remaining paint, out of your brushes, and it works really good for washing your hands as well. One of the things that I do at my studio to help stay clean and make cleanup easy is that I like to wear these gloves. And they can be latex gloves, latex-free gloves, whatever you want to wear. I don't wear these necessarily because I'm worried about the toxicity of the paint. I wear these so that when I'm done, I can simply take them off and my hands are clean and ready to go. And you can do that. So if you have the right tools, cleaning up oil paint isn't any harder than water-based paint. Finally, objection number 3 is that oil paint is just for the pros. Let's face it, when you walk into a museum, most of the paintings there are oil paintings. When you look at a lot of professional painters today, they're using oil paint, right? So it's only natural for a beginner painter to look at that and think, well, I'm obviously not good enough yet to be using oil paint, so I'm going to go use this other stuff. Also, I think that how art is taught in schools a lot of times influences the type of paint that we use. For instance, in most school programs and art studios, when it comes to kids' classes, they usually always use watercolor paint, acrylic paint, tempera paint, stuff that is fairly easy to clean up. And if you think about it, a lot of this paint is marketed toward kids. So as adults and beginners, I think that we look at that and we think, well, if that's what kids are using, then I guess that's what I should start with too. And so they begin working with those water-based paints. The problem lies in what I mentioned earlier, is that I think that those types of paints are actually a little bit more difficult to use than oil paint. So a lot of people use them, have trouble figuring them out, or they get frustrated because things are drying too fast, and they just think that, one, they're either just not good at painting, or 2, they just get really frustrated and quit and go do something else. So don't let the idea that you're not a pro painter with all this experience keep you from giving oil paint a shot. So what do you think? Do you disagree with my objections and solutions to them? Maybe you agree with them, or maybe you just have a different opinion or suggestion. I'd love to hear it. Go ahead and list it in the comments below, and let's see what you think. Hey, if you found this video helpful or valuable, I would really recommend that you hit that like and subscribe button so you can see more stuff like this in the future, and feel free to share it with your friends. Most importantly, stay creative, my friends.